Hello and welcome to our session on Hong Kong. This is part of a series of new hybridity sessions that we've been running in 2025. We've had Kazakhstan, we've had Greece, we've had Mexico, and I have a few more that are lined up as well. For me, it's a particular pleasure to be able to introduce this or say a few words to introduce this session as a long time back when I was a toddler, between the ages of 1 and 4. I used to live in Hong Kong, and I could say perhaps that my first architectural design experiences must come from Hong Kong because we lived first in Fanling, then we moved to what is now the Gold Coast, and we used to go to the beach every day. And I started making some sandcastles. So I would argue, and possibly I could be part of the session as well, that Hong Kong is a melting pot. There are so many people who have passed through and lived in Hong Kong. I think today's session is a perfect representation of Hong Kong. We have two Hong Kong natives, as it were. We have someone from the UK, we have someone from Romania, and we have someone from mainland China, and that, it seems to me, is Hong Kong, one of the most astonishing places on the planet, full of vitality. So today gives me great pleasure to welcome Adeline, who will be chairing the session. Adeline has been a long-standing member of Digital Futures and an extraordinary powerhouse in the context of Hong Kong today. So welcome, Adeline. It's great to see you, and thank you for coming to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. And it's a great pleasure to be here today and amongst this panel of very, very good researchers and designers. So without further ado, let's begin. So let's first start with the word hybridities. And Neil had a great start to say that Hong Kong is a real melting pot. And just to kind of dissect this word a little bit, this word is referencing the complex interplay of different elements, how different identities are increasingly mixed, and also the preference for diversity over purity. Now, this relates to what we're going to talk about today, and we're very lucky today to have this panel of great researchers who have all been diving into technology particularly, and we cannot not talk about technology in architecture in 2025. And I'm very proud to say Hong Kong is my home, and it's our home, and that we in this place in Hong Kong, we are nurturing our generation and then the next generation of great academics and researchers and designers who are going to be tech savvy. So identities. Technology injecting into traditional disciplines, that could be a mix of identities, injecting AI into architectural practice, that could be a mix, injecting cultures or mixing cultures together, that also can be, how we refer to hybridity. Okay, so other than myself today, I'm actually more excited to hear about you guys than present my work, because you guys have these 4 people who are with me today are great researchers, and some of them I've known for a while, and some of them I've admired afar. So I've been very lucky to have been a critic in Hao's studio from time to time, and Hao's been always been very generous with his time and our discussions of AI. So Professor Hao is assistant professor and associate leader of architecture programs at the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineer at the University of Hong Kong. He's also the director of his group, Architectural Intelligence Group, which I'm very sure that he's going to show some great works from. And he got his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and he specializes in some very relevant topics today: machine learning, AI-generated contents, data-driven analysis. Then we have Provides. So Provides, I've always admired, because at such a young age, she was already and is already the lecturer at UCL Bartlett. Not only that, she was also a committee member at the LCSD, that basically the government, one of the government's organizations of Hong Kong. Also an associate member at HKIA, and also the treasurer of the Association for Computer-Aided Architectural Design Research, which is, of course, in Asia, of course, very well known. Then we have Philippe. Philippe is actually like a friend of a friend, I believe, and that's how I feel very lucky to be able to invite Phil today. So Phil is the project director at OVO Partnership for Digital Placemaking. Very excited to hear about all the research that you guys are doing. Evidence-based design through the use of a toolkit of data-driven processes, that should be very intriguing. And also Cambridge and Harvard-educated architect and urbanist. So that already is quite impressive. And of course, last but not least, there's Professor Lidia. So Lidia is currently assistant professor at the University of Hong Kong in the Department of Architecture. Not only is she a computational designer, she is also a leading robotic fabrication researcher and architect. And when people are talking about robotics, Hong Kong, Lydia's name always come up, always, always, always. And she's also a graduate of IAC, very well-known school in Barcelona. Well, then I will just cruise into my own presentation, which is going to be 12 minutes. Each of us actually will be presenting our research, works, practice, etc. Within the time frame of 12 minutes. And at the end, Neil will jump back in and then have a fantastic discussion with us. Neil, so shall I begin? If no other things you want to bring up, does that work?
No, let's get going. Great. Thanks, Adeline. Thank you.
Let's get going. Okay, so for me, I want to probably dissect my time into three. I want to first begin with a starting point and then let you guys know a little bit about my own practice and the innovation that we're working on right now, and then a research paper that I'm currently writing with a professor. So hello, my name is Adeline or Adeline. Both ways work. I am currently a founder and CEO of my company called AL Innovation. Found out recently that I would be one of the executive curators of the Shenzhen Hong Kong Biennale. And well, I'm also providing AI courses for HKIA. I'm affiliated with Xcool. Some of you may have heard of it. That is the company that made LookX. And my background, I am an architect. So this is my team. I'm not going to go straight into it, but shout out to my CTO, who is double trouble, both an architect and a computer scientist. And we have great people working with us. So actually, we're only showing 8 people here. There are around 10 in total. So when we talk about hybridities, mixing, I feel that my non-linear career path definitely is the definition of that, because looking at what I'm doing right now and my practice, we are basically mixing the culture of Silicon Valley startup culture with design methodologies, which is my background. And coming with the AI era, what my company right now, what my group is doing right now is in 4 different scales. We're using AI to design, we're designing AI workflows, we're training other people how to use AI to design, and we're developing new softwares using AI for designers or construction. So what I'm going to say today is not necessarily showing you my designs, but I'm showing what, as Hong Kong's first AI startup that is focusing on upskilling the AEC industry, what we're doing. So and why we're doing it. And it is because the profit margins or the fee structure or the market infrastructure is, we deem, unsatisfactory in architecture and in this industry. And we believe AI is not a risk. We don't think it is a risk. It is an opportunity. And that is why we have set up this company together. And so the starting point is, first, a year ago, we were discovering how AI can come in and change our practice. And this is going to be relevant to our research paper, which we are always citing Neil's work, actually. And that is our starting point, because we see that the way we're working is changing. When one person with AI equals 3, like productivity, equals 3 people without. And therefore, we see that actually a lot is going to change just from that being impacted. And if people are starting to use AI, adopting it right now, I think we can refer to the graph, which is the 5 stages of technology adoption, and those people would be the early majority. So we want to tackle each stage in architecture and look into how AI technologies, different AI technologies, can perhaps help to automate, optimize different processes, and ultimately come up with an alternative, streamlined AI workflow for this industry. And we have to do that first by looking at the existing products. What are the existing AI tools and what are they good at? Because each one of them are good at different things. So we want to make sure that we understand their strengths and weaknesses. And as I was saying, this is a hybridity of a Silicon Valley startup culture and design methodology. Of course, we need to look at market sizes. And basically, it's quite evident that we deem a good opportunity to move into the AI market in this day and age. Now I move into my practice and innovation. So that was the starting point. And don't worry about this. This is a chart that for some reason decided not to show. But we want to explain to architects, or right now the people who are approaching us are also contractors, developers. That's why we're also having to travel quite a bit, because what we're trying to provide is also global. Is that there is an ROI as well, like being very practical when we're using AI in administrative tasks, in architectural design, in the design itself, in the coordination, in client marketing, everything, there is an ROI in using that. Not going to bore anyone with this, but this is our platform. We are developing a platform which will be, we hope to be a new ecosystem to the market, to the business structure of our industry. And this requires upskilling architects one by one, practice by practice. That is our goal. And also to help them to increase their profit margins, and also to find new job descriptions, because we all know that some old skills no longer will not be applicable anymore. Like, for example, drawing in CAD. Perhaps in a couple of years' time, the large language model we can pretty much talk to a software and omit the drawing stage. I won't go into that deeply at the moment, but I'm trying to explain this is the platform we're trying to build, and we are trying to fit this into a streamlined workflow. So we want to look into different pain points in the industry, and this is just one pain point we're showing. And we are training our AI agents in-house using retrieval augmented generation, and we're doing B2B as well as B2C on this. So not going to linger on this very full of text kind of slide, but we dissect and analyze the current every single stage in the construction as much as we can, and we try to identify which ones are ready for AI to be implemented, which ones are ready already for using existing tools, and which ones are not yet ready. And this is valuable to clients. So now coming into the research, which is currently we're working on. So we've already, myself had been looking into this for a while, but it hasn't been formally written into a paper until now. So this is why I'm very excited to be working with Dr. Emmanuel Cursoni, who is an assistant professor in the Polytechnic of University, who's mainly working in computational semantics, cognitive modeling, and adapting language technology. So I'm not going to pretend that I know everything what he's doing, but what is very important is that we see that there is a very interesting topic when we are thinking about large language models, creativity, architectural design, and how that impacts the industry. And just to, like a 10-second explanation of what large language models do, based on the transformer architecture, they're trained on vast amounts of data on the task of mixed word prediction. So what you're seeing here is that the large language model is able to predict what the next word is, and in here, very likely is going to be a noun. And it knows that because of the large amount of data that's been trained on. So citing Neil in our paper, architecture relies on a vocabulary of canonical expressions and projects can be realized via variations of the same underlying design. And why is this important? Is because what we want to look at is what extent can large language model generate novel concepts and ideas beyond what they have seen during their training, which is the machine creativity. What is the impact on existing business models of architectural consultancy and subsequently the market infrastructure? Because we want to make a point to say that, in quoting Margaret Bolden, creativity can be dissected, analyzed into three different types of categories: combinatorial, exploratory, and transformational. And scholars have been classifying that the current state of machine creativity as combinatorial, and not going to go into too much detail of it, but we want to stress that, for example, combinatorial creativity. For example, an architect finding the iterations of floor plan based on a given brief, parametric design. Exploratory would be like someone developing a new drawing software, because that's exploring like a new way to do things, construction technologies, for example. Transformational is coming up with a different theory, a different innovation that is more, turning 180 degrees. So that's very often coming from philosophers, academics from this field. So when we're talking about combinatorial, like parametric design, iterations of floor plan, that's because I have worked in the industry. I know that that is actually the main scope of the architect's job. It is not the concept design. The main job of an architect after they get licensed is to work on floor plans that the client wants, and they want us to comply to the design brief. But actually, if large language models are capable of machine creativity, they can actually take over that certain extent part of the work. And so what does that mean for the structure of the industry, and what does that mean for architects themselves? So this is where we are at right now. Thank you. Sorry. So I think I should stop my screen sharing now, and I think I'd be very happy to invite Professor Hao to be the next speaker, and I will be handing it to you. Thanks, Hao.
Okay, thank you, Adeline. So yeah, let me share my screen first. Okay, so thank you, Adeline, for your very nice presentation of your work. So I'm going to present my research. So my topic is more about the research we did before in my research group. So my name is Hao. I'm currently an assistant professor in the City University of Hong Kong. Then my research usually cares about two tracks. So one is the generative design AI, in which we use generative design tools like AI tools or parametric design tools to help to generate architecture design solutions. Then in the second track that I'm not going to present today is about the predictive assistant AI. So in which it deals like the urban big data and how we use like AI techniques with urban big data to solve urban problems. So today I mainly want to share that my research about the generative design AI, in which we not only want to use AI as the like the image on the left, in which we use AI more as like an AI drawer for the designer, but we want to further use machine learning, use AI to also like replace some kind of human thinking to make it as a true AI designer that could think design by itself. So the methodology actually comes from the left of this computer aided design to the right of what we defined as this machine learning assisted design. So in this machine learning assisted design, we train our AI designer as a kind of AI model. No, we not just give the rules or give some script to the computer, but we also give the data. Then we train our own AI designer. Then the AI designer can serve as a new design assistant for us. So it all starts from maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. So we firstly try to train a very simple AI to generate something for us. So in this research, we connected like I think it's almost 800 architecture drawings. Then we make it into black and white boundary. Then we train AI to ask AI to generate the output of this content of these floor plan drawings from the input of a black and white image showing its boundary. Then you can see from this very very early experiment, we can see actually AI can help us to generate something. Then we further applied the stable diffusion in this task to still allow users to like input the boundary, but the stable diffusion can also output multiple designs for us. So in the current stage, you can see the generated image is not blurry. So it actually is very clear. Then we can use that further to further develop our design of this floor plan. So in the most recent research, we also think how we can like use another AI on the top of the generative AI to evaluate whether the generated result is good or not. So in this step 2, we built some like evaluative AI like GAN model to evaluate the performance, like the for example like the sunlight simulation or like the wind performance of a floor plan. Then we can further filter the floor plan we want with the high performance. So besides the floor plan, we also train our own machine model to generate 3D architecture morphology. So this is the research like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Then we connected the architecture morphology from different architects. Then we try to make all this data into its vector-based data for the architecture morphology. Then we can train our vector-based machine model to predict its architecture form from its footprint. So also we have an exhibition of this research. Then we 3D print some very interesting form that are generated by the AI. But still, we also have some experiment on the stable diffusion. So I think Adeline also introduced stable diffusion. So we can understand stable diffusion as a kind of image generative tool. Then our first research about stable diffusion is that we can use the a very simple input like the image on the top left. Then we can build a box. Then we can ask the AI to generate some details for us according to some guidance from this, let's call it a massing model. So you can see the AI can give us a lot of results. Then we can certainly pick some for our further development. Also, if we already have like well-designed massing model, then we can still put that to AI. Then we ask AI to generate further designs with the controlled by the architect's name. So the name can represent the design style of these architects. So by inputting these names, we can also control the final outcome of our design. So the same rules applies to the physical model. So if we don't have time to build a very detailed physical model, then we can also build a very simple one, like the one on the left. Then we use AI architect's name to control the generation of a detailed architecture model on the right. Also for the drawings. So even if we just have a very simple drawing, we can use AI to complete some design details to make it into a well-designed architecture image just with a very simple drawings here. So the most research in our group in this track is that we are going to combine the generative design, the outcome of the generative design with the digital manufacturing. So here we want to see how we can like transform the AI generated image into the 3D model. Then we use some structural optimization algorithm to optimize its structure of this product. Then we can automatically put this product into the like the robotic arm to build this product. So here the product is kind of like trails or tables. Also, we want to see how we can use another way to control the generation of the 3D morphology based on 2D image generation. So this video shows some tricks that we made of the stable diffusion. So here we train the 2D based stable diffusion, but with the compressed information in this what we call this height heat map. So in this height heat map, the pixel value can represent the height of each pixel in this 3D building. So that's why we train it as a 2D image, but after we get this generated to the height heat map, then we can further transform that into a 3D model. In this way, we actually can drive the stable diffusion to generate the 3D information, but it's still a 2D algorithm. So another trying of our recent research is the direct generation of vector-based like editable models in some software like Rhino. So here we embed large language model into the Rhino. Then we can ask the designer to only input a kind of prompt or to describe what kind of model they want. Then our large language model can output the vector-based modeling information in some as the editable format in Rhino. So the generated morphology not only about the architecture, but also it can be something like a table or urban form or something like a gear here. So that can all be generated by our large language model. So the next research I want to share is about the structure design. So besides architecture, we can also apply AI to structured design as long as we have structured data. So the first research is that we try to train an AI as a surrogate model to simplify the structural performance computation. So previously, for example, if we want to figure out how a structure is good or not, then we need certain computation in our simulation software, but that is very slow. So in this research, we try to train our surrogate machine model with the pre-generated structural data. Then we can simplify the entire process and make it within a time limit. So this kind of workflow can allow us to quickly get the overall structural performance among a large amount of like structural forms. So that's why we can evaluate the structural form by not generating its form, but we can get its performance. Then we can see if we further generate the form, then we can see it's actually so the performance is actually very nice. Then we can also say that we can save some materials because we evaluate its performance. But based on this research, so I want to introduce our next research also on the structural form. So in this research, we not only want to train the AI by human data, but we want to train AI by some natural structural data. Because we think maybe in the nature we can learn a lot, but if our human being is very difficult to learn the features in some natural structures, then we can still train AI to see whether AI can learn these very nice structures from nature. So here we take the dragonfly wing as the example. So firstly, we make the image of this dragonfly wing into vector-based data according to graphic statistics. Then we train the machine models. So the overall goal is that we want the users to only draw a boundary of this structure. Then we can generate the structure inside it. So we firstly test the performance of the generation of the Dragonfly wings. So we can see they are highly similar of our generative wing and the real wing. Then we can further apply the same machine learning tools to not only generate in the boundary of Dragonfly wing, but also in the boundary of human wing. So here we mean the airplane wing. So we can see actually the model gives us a kind of Dragonfly wing structure inside its boundary, but it's constrained in the boundary of airplane wing. So then we want to test the performance. So we 3D print some samples. So all those samples, they are in the same volume, same weight, and the same material, same height. So the only difference is the distribution of the structural elements. So we can see in the test of the wind tunnel, so our wing has a very high structural stiffness. So almost all the generative wings from our system is better than the original designed wing in the airplane. The most performative wing has 25% of the stiffness increasement according to the base model. So we can see this kind of techniques can actually prove that we learn from nature, but we train our machine model to learn from nature. Then the machine model can feedback with like better structural design than our human beings. So we published this paper in the Advanced Science as the cover paper. I think last month we just got the US patent. So I think we can maybe have a plan to like further cooperating with some airplane manufacturer to see whether we can further apply our knowledge to really improve the industry. Yeah. So finally, to end my presentation, so I want to propose some questions. So actually, I think everyone might have a similar question that what is the future of our architects? So I think since AI is going to AI is super powerful nowadays, but as you can see, for each AI, like the 4-pan generation AI, or like 3D modeling AI, or even like the airplane wing generation AI. So each AI is very good as a specific task. So I think our architects maybe in the future might work more as the master architects. So who actually controls the entire process, but we can freely apply different AI in different stages. Then we can see whether we can have a future of the coexistence of our human being and AI. So let's see for my presentation. Thank you. So Adeline?
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Hao. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And just to say one line about it, I think it's fantastic that you were doing the wind tunnel test to test the structural performance of the structure that you generated from your trained AI. And I think that goes beyond the concept design and it goes beyond anything that is 2D. And that is, quite profound. And congrats on your patent. I didn't know that happened recently.
Yeah,
Really well
last
done.
month, I think.
Great. Well, we're going to leave the questions until the very end. So now I'm going to have the pleasure to invite Provides to be the next speaker. So Provides, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Neil and Adeline, for inviting. That was a very generous introduction. So today I would like to talk about how we build smart cities in super diversity. And I think the provocation is to say that we gather here today not merely to discuss cities of concrete and silicon, but to confront a more fundamental question. Can a city be both smart and human? So Hong Kong is a metropolis for 7.5 million souls that stands at the crossroad of this inquiry, where efficiency could easily eclipse humanity. So today, as we engineer smart cities, I want us to also navigate this tension. And I position the problem at the collision of these three ideas. First is human-human collaboration in high-density, super diverse contexts. Second is human-machine interaction that bridge the subjective input of humans with the objective arithmetics of machines. And finally is the machine-machine collaboration between smart and intelligent. Let's start with the first one. So superdiversity is a social science concept that describes the diversification of societies in global migration. For me, it's not merely a demographic computation, but rather a participatory intelligence. For instance, we see that in Sydney, the ethnicity is diverse, and thus the spoken language is also diverse, and thus the religion is also diverse. But when we actually look at Hong Kong, only 8% of the population is not of Chinese ethnicity. So why do we call Hong Kong a super diverse context? I made a very brief comparison that in Sydney, diversity is a festival. It is about celebration and expression in the public realm. Whereas in Hong Kong, it is about a quiet negotiation. So consider this, that 45% of Hong Kong people are over 50 years old. Their voices are often absent from digital town halls. 30% reside in public housing, where communal spaces host both aspirations and grievances. Identity here is a kaleidoscope. You can be Hong Konger, Chinese, both, or neither. And so we must shape intelligence through an understanding of diversity. In many places, superdiversity is not simply about multiculturalism, it is hybrid in a post-colonial dance of integration, where differences is absorbed but not erased. And so to design smart city here, we must first see beyond the facade of uniformity. And so I want us to think about two problems. First is how to diversify the understanding of superdiversity. And second is how we can bring together the lived experience of differences as an engine of human-human collaboration. Now, second is machine-machine collaboration. When I look into the government document and definition of smart city, the first thing is that there are no universal adopted definition of smart city. And it's generally defined to be a city that leverages ICT technology to improve the quality of life for citizens. But of course, we're here to develop a more unique critical angle on that. And so we must ask a deeper question. For instance, what is the difference between smart and intelligent? Now here on the left, we see a network of sensing, actuation, and control components to analyze data and perform actions, the cybernetic loop. And on the right, we see an intelligent system where machines can perceive its environment, process information, and make decisions based on input data, like a base model of the neural network. Both of them are attributed first to Weiner as understanding intelligence as a science of cybernetics or control and communication in the animals and the machines. Whereas on the right, we see Rosenblatt, who defined intelligence as a probabilistic model of information storage and organization. The implication of this is kind of like the metaphor of our body and our neural system. For a smart system, you have a reflexive intelligence, where if you're presented with a stimuli, your hand just sort of retract from the fire without actually thinking much. Whereas an intelligent system is one that deals with the brain part of our body, where neurological signals are able to conceive information. And so taking that back to built environment design, how do we design cities that are both smart and intelligent in a super diverse context? Well, of course, we're not going to solve this problem in 15 minutes. So I would just advocate that in diversify our understanding of intelligence, we can look towards nature, from the self-organization of slime mold to the flocking system, to the history of human aesthetics and mathematics. A way to combine these two arenas comes our third problem, which is human-machine interaction. And as with all human-computer interaction, and most of informatics, we can place theories and design practice based on objectivity and mathematics at one end of the spectrum, and subjectivity in language at the other end of the spectrum. So I visualize a very simple spectrum for you. For instance, in the objective side, we have traditional computer science that uses user modeling, experimental research in controlled environments to understand how humans interact with computers. Whereas on the subjective side is a more social semiological approach to understand the complexity of human behavior. And later I'll be showing a project that actually tries to demonstrate this side of the approach. And for me, built environment design is always about this Venn diagram rather than the opposing spectrum. And I think the question that we're searching for today is how we can actually bridge the two ends and find a common ground. So just to demonstrate through 3 cases of participatory intelligence from ideation, design to fabrication. The first one is called volumetric cinema. I work in collaboration with the Bi-City Biennale of Urbanism and Architecture 3 years ago, wow, where we bring 30 participants from all walks of life to reimagine urban regeneration. But we didn't do it with city blueprints, rather we do it with urban stories. The result was a digital archive of collective memory. As Jane Jacob would note, the cities have the capacity to provide something for everybody only because they are created by everybody. So over 2 months, participants mapped out the city not with CAD software, but with cinema. For instance, the experience of rushing to work every day through the convolution of skywalks and bridges, the perspective of youth living in low-income neighborhoods and attending school with an aspiration, or the grandmother living alone and sitting in the public park to find a sense of connection with her neighbors. So through this medium of navigatable cinema, participants co-imagine the future of housing and co-living in hyperdense environments through new building topologies. Essentially, they imagine a series of architectural Legos where citizens can manipulate kit parts to create the lived environments. In this future, data is not mined but shared. This is one example of the film that participants produced together with the imagination and all of the discussions that went with it throughout the 2 months and finally resulting in an exhibition became a starting point for further queries and speculations. So a second experiment actually brings the idea of architectural Lego to life within a video game environment, and we call this a digital common project. So I invited youth and older adults to actually co-design their ideal public space in Metaverse, and the age range spans from 7 years old to 70 years old. Hong Kong citizens are pretty amazing. And the machine basically translated Cantonese into architectural forms. And here, Metaverse and the AI chatbot became a cultural bridge. I'll just quickly go through one of the outcomes. This is an intergenerational zip garden. So citizens wanted to tackle this public space, which is a very typical layout of housing built in the 80s and 90s and over 180 18 million. Okay, sorry, my Chinese to English number just messed up. Anyway, a large portion of Hong Kong citizens actually reside in similar housing topologies, and the design remained largely the same for the past 50 years. And so citizens begin to think about how we can integrate needs of older adult with culture of youth. And they brought together the idea of pet companionship together with community tea house and tried to co-design a public space with a synthesis of these functions. They also tried to search for what is a Hong Kong Chinese identity in this colonial context, in the sense that what is the typical form? How do Hong Kong people understand Chinese architecture, and how we can actually bring those together into a functional design? So this is the final outcome. As you can see, a very beautiful serene garden with a vertical zoning strategy that on the first floor, they hope that is a place where people of different ages can come together, have tea, enjoy a little see-through performance, and actually spend time with animals. And on the second floor, you can actually enjoy the view, have more interactive activities. And in the whole design, you can see how they try to integrate people with and without pets into a community circle that tried to have mutual understanding between one another, as currently in public housing, pets are prohibited. And in the final project, we tried to actually fabricate and manifest some of the ideas in physical space as a proof of concept that citizens can co-produce spaces together. We actually upcycle waste wood in the process, and we also leverage generative AI to actually ideate what kind of public furniture they would like. From one of the stories, an elderly reminded us of a demolished wet market that he used to spend his childhood in. And he thinks that nowadays youth doesn't enjoy so much in this lousy, more messy environment, but these are exactly the environment that gave immersion to neighborhood relationships and community building. And so they wanted to understand how we can recreate this sort of urban artifact that can encode the shared memory. And so the lived experience of people in different generations can actually be passed down. Now, of course, the AI has a lot of bias in the process in understanding what is Chineseness in a cultural object. And so we actually engage citizens to co-produce a chair, including a craftsman who works in Chinese woodcraft, and also architecture students to upcycle neighborhood waste through a heat-shrink plastic joinery. So in the process, no nails were used, and we try to reflect, well, if we don't have mortise and tenon joint, in what ways can we modernize or reinterpret Chinese intelligence in furniture making? But of course, as a researcher, I guess the most important thing is what are the intangible outcomes that came out of this collaborative process? So this is a paper that I published with architectural intelligence from the Springer Journal collections. As we can see, workshop 1 is less intergenerational, where workshop 3 is highly intergenerational. We do see that people's social participation gets a lot more excited when they're less intergenerational. However, their performance was also less stable. And in the process, although older adults couldn't contribute so much on the technical side, they actually contribute a lot on the physical side. And their input actually have a stabilizing performance to all of the teams, as you can see that the fluctuation of the line doesn't have such a big deviation. And I think from all of the experiments that we've conducted, one of the output in research is definitely what are the frameworks we can use to evaluate or assess the impact of co-creation efforts in Hong Kong, and how can we understand the role of technology in it. So these are some of the parameters that are emerging throughout the participation process that can be useful for other researchers or practitioners to adopt in evaluating their own projects. Finally, I would just like to say that the application of AI can be used to solve the most banal architectural problem. It doesn't have to look cool, yet these problems impact us on an everyday level as a citizen. And so we must have a more human-centric approach to technology, but also to urban design. And just to answer the question that I asked in the beginning of how we can bring smart intelligence and human together. We started with the Wiener pinning cybernetic loop and also the Rosenblatt neural network model. But here I would like us to also take a critical angle in implementing these models into the way that cities are designed. That we must have smart systems that bring urban system that can adapt itself to environmental condition and user needs instantly at a local level. But also we need intelligent systems, which are urban systems that can make longer term and more complex decisions at a higher level. In that sense, we don't just speculate on 5 and 10 years time, but we also actually think about what are the climatic strategies we're taking? How can we be ecological and community at the same time in maybe 2050 or longer? So these are the 3 words that I'll like all of us perhaps as a provocation to discussion, which is participatory, augmented, and transform. That AI or other types of machine is a participant in the process. They're here to augment our creativity, and they're not here to replace our intelligence. And the way that we shape our tools will also shape us, as Marshall McLuhan has talked about. And I'll just leave us here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Provides. That was a very insightful presentation, very well articulated. And I very much enjoyed your diagrams as well, the Venn diagram for sure. And I spotted some of yourself in the metaverse, actually, I think. And research is great. We will talk more about it at the end. Thank you so much. So I think I now have the pleasure. Thank you. I think I now have the pleasure to invite Phil to be the next speaker. If that's all right.
Excellent. Thanks
So much.
Adeline. Great. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. So yeah, thanks to Adeline and Neil for the hosting, and also for the sequence in which we're talking. I think I'm the sole sort of practicing architect in industry in the group today, and I think it's been really valuable to kind of hear some of the academic underpinnings of the work that we're trying to put into practice today. Our Hong Kong context that we all share is astonishingly complex, and in many ways it's a great testing lab to actually test some of the tools that I think we're all trying to develop to actually see whether they can deal with the challenges of density and three-dimensionality that we all live in Hong Kong. And one of the key insights, I think, from the growth of Hong Kong in this densification is just how much it's driven by externalities about carving up of space and boundaries and so on. So one of the things that, in terms of our insights, is to think about the space between buildings in terms of its fundamental context as both a space for living, a social space, and the place that people can come together and socialize. So my talk's going to be three parts, just very quickly run through some of the academic underpinnings starting in the 19th century with Patrick Geddes and the emergence of complexity theory and how that moves through what we're doing right now in practice for our clients and in academia as well, and then also what we're currently developing and moving it on. Christopher Alexander's work, The City is Not a Tree, was a sort of instrumental piece of work that started to think about multiple connections and informal levels of relationships in the city. Perhaps, now this is all rather obvious, but at the time, with the predominance of a sort of rigid modernist and sort of machine for living in approach to the city, this was quite influential at the time to kind of reset thinking and think much more about the multifaceted human-centric nature of cities and the emergent way that they evolve. So the key insight really is the city as a network. And the hybridity here is, of course, now that we have these digital overlays of our world, we can actually start to map a number of these human relationships, both physical and, of course, online as well. And the two intersect. Bill Hillier's work at UCL, a lot will be familiar with, was instrumental, where you start to decode space, think of space, then translate it into a topology, effectively a series of lines or axial maps, then move on to translate and understand space as a series of interconnected routes and nodes, and then finally to sort of translate that back into a spatial form using a sort of visual graph theory. This gives us a kind of way to decode space and the complexities of the city in a kind of manageable, lightweight, scalable way, and we'll talk about how that works. So what do I do? Well, I lead a team at Oval Partnership. We've been practicing, I think, developing this team for about 8 years now. The fundamental driver is a more measured data-based approach to building thriving communities. Our practice has sort of got started developing open city, complex master planning and architectural projects. So we were always kind of public space first for a lot of our approach. So digital placemaking is this evidence-based toolkit to actually harness the place and people data analytics. It should allow us to measure the district's footfall, both from conceptual planning through design iteration to post-completion, and identify the diversity of uses that are vital for successful placemaking. So we work at all scales, from the transit and movement scale, that could be road, rail, and so on, using similar tools, through understanding market positioning and land use by looking at various data sources we'll talk about. And then sort of critical part of our work that sits in the middle is this sort of context benchmarking. All of our projects essentially get benchmarked through a series of tools with calibrated scales, so we can effectively work with our clients to compare and demonstrate with evidence where projects are scoring highly and where latent potential and improvements can be spotted. We do a lot of public space and street design. Again, the space between buildings is important. The spatial network analysis is one of the core metrics, or sits behind two core metrics, and we also do public realm activity assessment. So we might stay at a macro scale, even regional scale, look at connectivity, and then how that connects in with last mile walkability through that movement network. As I said, the movement network's key. along with the sort of overlaid social network. We can predict footfall flows, measure store catchments, compare market demand. We can benchmark particular sites in terms of strengths and weaknesses and scale. We can look at land use mix variation. We can basically reveal why people visit a store or a place, and that speaks to the character, diversity, vitality, and rhythm of the place. So the idea is these are very human-centric, place-centric impact indicators. Mobile device data that's aggregated and anonymized is hugely useful because people won't stop to provide questionnaires on clipboards and stuff anymore. So it gives us an ability to scale this urban intelligence. So we often assess massing and location, understand the context of building in terms of its flexibility, responsiveness to change at all scales. We look at dwell time numbers to understand the level of engagement in a place. And it allows us to basically generate place-specific proposals, actionable and tactical, really boosting the health and vitality of space by allowing people to move through easily. Permeability of space, connecting our site with adjacent sites is absolutely important. That builds that long-term resilience and it's mutually beneficial across the city. And it's something that in very rapidly developing Asian cities, that sort of continuity of urban space is something that needs to be actively worked at because so much is changing so fast. So these are some of the things that we use the data for. We use sensor data in practice. We're understanding buildings, districts, but we're also understanding omni-channel tailored retail experiences as well, where some of our clients have got very strong online footprints, but they still have absolutely vital experience centres in cities. So walkability is sort of number one. It's the glue that binds successful places together. So we actually are continuing to develop and refine our analysis of walkability, understand, build three-dimensional maps of all of those spaces interconnected and look at changes in terms of sensitivity analysis. We use POI analysis, point of interest activity data, to understand the usage diversity that emerge in different urban uses. This allows us to essentially do a little measure of the changing district vibrancy. It's something that we tend to call a kind of health check on the city. We do catchment analysis, access to transit. Obviously, somewhere like Hong Kong, large number of people have PT, public transit access and so on. That's supply side metric to actually allow more people to get to activities in the city. We can actually benchmark that, okay, and essentially harness the space within and around buildings so that it's put to kind of useful, good use in the community. Obviously, we also use it to kind of make justifications for investing in particular locations. So that might well be building upgrades, but more often it might be arrival nodes, new crossings, new bridges, new tunnel connections, and so on. And our far-sighted clients who are looking at this often are very keen in a Hong Kong context to make sure they're connected at basement, ground level, and levels above as well. So that's where Hong Kong is such a useful context for our work. At the end of the day, we need to sort of essentially tie and track KPIs for those thriving places. Active placekeeping is key for that resilient, vibrant experiences, long-term growth, improved footfall, and appreciation in the social capital. I won't dwell here, but obviously we've got conventional data sources include gate line counting, camera surveys, big data footprints, and local counts as well. Here is this key metric. If we unpack walkability, we see there is a connectivity metric. You can see here, this is in 3D, this image on the left. This basically shows us the ability to support an attractive mix of uses. It's vital so the warmer colours are better. And then the second metric that emerges from this theory is flow potential, which basically gives us a strong predictive potential of which routes people are more likely to take through a development. And as we change through routes and permeability of onward movement, crossing locations, those actually change. We're doing this in 3D now, in full 3D. it's the beauty of this is it provides this use-free assessment of urban grain or suburban grain to understand its potential in terms of further development and ease of access and so on. So we have this as a baseline before then looking at activities and overlays. This is a piece of work where we're essentially using catchment analysis. We use Baidu APIs in this work to essentially work out those 400-meter through the network movement catchments, so we can see how different retail rival destinations in Shanghai here might compare with Yuyuan Gardens and so on. Step 2 is to then crawl the POI data across all categories. We use typically Baidu, Google Maps, but there are other data sources, so we can understand precisely the kind of use mix within those catchments. From having that, we can basically provide a kind of mass benchmark score for a particular destination of the city in terms of just richness of activities there. And then we can use a standard kind of retail gravitation model to understand isochrone catchment boundaries between different rival destinations. We can then look at the threshold values by which we might need to inject further uses or activities into a particular site of focus to actually build its kind of attractiveness, and essentially shift catchment boundaries to enlarge the kind of pulling power and attractiveness of developments. And you can see once we've obtained that gravity, we can and got a sort of more comprehensive score of attractiveness of the site. We can look at different rent information can be injected, population information can be injected. We can actually look at the potential growth in number of customers in a region, per capita spending, and so on. This is some more catchment analysis. This is Singapore, Malaysia. It was a recent piece of work we were looking at for just the details of the age range, demographics, the spending profiles of different visitors to sites, and then looking at the impact sensitivity analysis of introducing new lanes, improving access to particular sites. This is a piece of work in Chengdu where we're looking at a site to the northeast of the city. You can see the centre of the city in red there. That site to the northeast, nearer the kind of new high-speed rail. We can essentially get a kind of X-ray of all the activities that we then do a standard categorization of. And then we can inject new uses, complementary uses that were perhaps missing in the city, particularly these newer districts. We could see that there was a huge opportunity to actually put in arts, culture, and open space in here to actually give it an attractive draw and to kind of provide that diversity of different uses. This is a piece of work where we're essentially taking that link and node graph work and then turning it into a heat map, flow potential, so we can see how layouts exiting out of MTR stations in Shanghai at basement level are affected in terms of flows around island development, where we can maintain, on the right image, you can see where we can maintain visibility across the exits and the routes, various different routes out of these spaces. We can massively boost the frontage exposure, building or shop frontage exposure to potential pedestrian footfall flows. So we can use this to get much better, more clearer, legible, less confusing design of spaces. You can see here, let's just when we overlay all of these analyses, we start to get quite a kind of matrix of different design options as we test different metrics across those core scores. We use sort of 4 common use metrics, so it kind of soon multiplies. So we were trying to work out a way to actually kind of manage this complexity and present results to clients in terms of the iterations. This is a little example of using some of those tools in Anger in Chengdu, where we're kind of using the suite of tools, Chengdu Taikoo Li, that we've been working on, sort of the second of our open city developments for Swire in China, leveraging heritage as an asset in the former neglected centre of the city. You can see some big data and analytics here that shows the work distribution of visiting populations. You can see how there's a strong hotspots to the south on that south-north line before they get into the centre and change to head east. So it kind of shows you where the kind of potential rivals might emerge in the city that would impact the footfall and flows that the site currently has, which are very significant. As you get in at the next level, that sort of meso-middle level, you can see us do some POI density analysis here, both 2020 to 2023, to see the impact of adding those new uses and uses returning back to a city centre site around a fabulous temple structure. And so basically allows us to see that changing activity and map it at quite a granular scale. That's the connectivity scoring again there, so that reflects that ability to support that rich mix of uses. That fine-grained street network that has on the routes just boosts us to a sort of very solid red or orange. Those are sort of very good scores. This makes these, basically shows the walkability of the districts and where things start to tail off. And then as we continue to work with our clients, our long-term clients, expanding and naturally involving the city, we look at how we could actually adjust street grids early days before potential selective redevelopment to actually allow these places to be navigable, legible, and have really good access. His three-dimensional model of the city with the different levels. In China, obviously, we nearly always have a metro connection to these developments, so we're looking at sort of three principal levels of movement flow. Again, the Hong Kong context is very valuable in terms of bringing that layered understanding of the city together. Finally, or near finally, you can see the way in which we can do a POI sweep of an activity sweep of TKL Chengdu. We can look at the current state, understand that spatial integration, understand the different usage clusters. We can then pinpoint activity and reveal different patterns that emerge. New streets like Tangbao Street to the south, where F&B Street was kind of opening up post-COVID, became a kind of new hot district. Allows us to actually ensure that our master planning and continued development of districts essentially is informed by and evolves out of the kind of natural trends in the city rather than trying to impose them from the outside. Finally, you can see here the FBFE, that frontage pedestrian flow exposure, so how exposed fronts of shops are to the most number of people moving by. Measure actually those increases in footfall whilst retaining really good quality retail floor space, and carving out space by knowing where people move for really good flexible pop-up spaces that aren't in direct routes of footfall but adjacent. That gives us these very strong resilience because it builds in a lot of flexibility, and this work we do a lot to justify moving away from longer-term fixed lease spaces onto reprogrammable spaces, which is sort of vital to keep everything fresh. So trying to digest it in terms of research, we're now moving on towards being able to think about the different dimensions of metrics and scoring. We're talking about a sort of fuzzy spider diagrams for different kinds of sites in a city that allow us to build an easy kind of navigable, intuitive interface for our clients, so that basically they can lead and work their way through the data. Particularly useful for kind of leaseholders who might be looking for particular characteristics. It might be a kind of highly scoring in terms of heritage, being close to main pedestrian flows, but perhaps a street or two just back, where we start to see a lot of luxury boutiques and so on open across cities. So the kind of complementary scoring allows us to give strong indications of where within our buildings uses should be best placed. In our, I didn't really say, but we have most of our data science and human-centric transit planning team are based in Europe. And we're currently doing a UK government-sponsored program with Loughborough to essentially automate a lot of the national mapping network to actually build their own movement network in an automated fashion. So that obviously gives us that ability to democratize access, gives us that sort of urban intelligence for all, and essentially allows perhaps a new startup, someone who's thinking of choosing location for a shop or a business, can actually use these tools to work out the best location intelligence for themselves. So these are the kind of early mock-ups where we're actually automating using AI to actually build these accurate link and node movement networks. It will give us this ability to comprehensively benchmark pedestrian accessibility and estimate footfall. Essentially, we can do that and come up with hourly footfalls and people per hour, which is exactly what most developers will want and understand. And then further, we're actually using hex grids that are now open source, and then that's a sort of global hex grid. This is large. I think this has also been adopted by Uber in terms of understanding and moving not just onto GIS, which most of this analytics is worked on, but moving to a massive geospatial scalable databases online. And then once we've inputted all this data, we can start to draw inferences and let AI actually come back with proposals which understand the key metrics and scoring in terms of openness and permeability through the space and the lively and vibrancy. So we can put numbers to a lot of softer concepts in city planning. So what we're trying to do is allow our analytics to be lightweight and wieldy enough to actually allow us to employ them almost as live as developments in the city is changing. Basically, in order to give us the tools and the evidence, the strong evidence to go to our clients and our collaborators and the stakeholders and craft really apposite narrative experiential urban living, curating that space between the buildings. And that's underpinned by people, location, and community data to actually build those flourishing places that actually generate social capital and have that longer term resilience. That's me. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Phil. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing a different angle. Urban planning is very data-driven, and your urban intelligence supports the informed decision-making process, which I believe is definitely a competitive advantage for your practice to have an R&D team doing what you're doing to support the projects. And also, it's very Hong Kong, isn't it? Real estate, commercial design, and spot on to what Hong Kong and mainland clients are looking for, I'm sure. So, and mainland China, perhaps that's a good segue to our last but not least speaker, who is also working on projects in mainland China, but I believe with quite a different agenda, and also doing it in perhaps a different way. So welcome, Lidia, to be our final speaker of today. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Adeline. Thank you so much for having me. It's not my first time in DigitalFUTURES, so I really thought a lot about which projects to show. I don't want to repeat myself and what would be interesting to show. So it's a lot of pressure to be the last one of the day. So I thought maybe I'm going to do something a little bit provocative in the sense that I'm going to talk not necessarily about fabrication, AI, all the things that we do and kind of just focus on that, but really look at behind the scenes. So today, because I also thought like I thought about like the theme of Hong Kong and what do we need here. And I think we're very, very good at learning new things and implementing new things and financing models and all that. But sometimes it's exactly the human touch that lacks a little bit. So that's kind of the angle that I'm going to focus on today within this context of the digital world, basically. So, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. So today I called my talk The Underbelly of an Architect, or the relationship between the digital and the physical, because as I've mentioned, I kind of want to focus on the nitty-gritty behind the big things that we're doing. And it's inspired by a Peter Greenaway movie, The Belly of the Architect, a film that explores themes of architectural ambition, obsession, intersection of life and arts, and all is set in the background of rich architectural history. And I kind of thought I kind of resonated with this this movie and the way in which it's thinking about things. So that's why I decided to kind of name my lecture in homage to that. So speaking of films, let me introduce you guys to the main characters that we will be looking at today: the robot, the software, the material, the social media, the human who is untrained, the human who is trained, and the human who is a specialist, and the non-human. I have a little non-human with me here in case you're hearing some weird sounds. They're not coming from me. So how do we go from this pristine image of the robot, this kind of surreal, uncanny valley type of image of the robot that is very detached from us, that is this kind of majestic object that we have so much admiration for, but it's not really part of our day-to-day experience, to a kind of more realistic understanding of robots within the fabrication lab, where we have focusing on material, focusing on experimental techniques, which a few years ago kind of seemed to be the reality of it. And now to robots into the wild, robots on site, what's the potential of that? And how does this happen? What does this mean? What does this entail? And actually, this beautiful image of robots building on site wouldn't be possible without this backstage homekeeping, to say so. It takes a lot of human effort, a lot of humans directly involved into being able to use robots in various areas of the world. This is, for example, in mainland China, in Sanmenxia. And it's exactly this behind the scenes that we never talk. We usually talk about a very, very small part of design, a very specialized one, especially, let's say, if you're dealing with digital, you're going to talk about the digital part. But there's an entire story that we very rarely tell because it's not that attractive, I guess so. I want to share something very personal. This is me on site in the left, eating stale bread. And on the right, brushing my teeth with my friend's toothbrush because I had just eaten something very bad and I was going to be interviewed by Yi Tiao. So I think this is a very interesting reality that is a big part of the digital world, of the computational design world, that doesn't get enough credit. And this is an image taken today, like 4 or 5 hours before this talk, on site in Stanley Beach in Hong Kong, where we're putting up a pavilion, and we had a very strict deadline, and so we had to do that during amber rain. So technology has this way of influencing everybody. It touches everybody's life, but it kind of fails to benefit everyone. But whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, whether it's robots or AI or some sort of software or computer or phone, we are all influenced by this, regardless also of the generation. This is an old lady who is using PayMe's QR codes to be paid, even though she's working somewhere in a very remote location. This is a little child already very familiar with various postures of technology, drones, phone, probably a future great film director. And technology allows us to do a lot of things. This is the Traditional House of the Future project. I'm not going to go too much into detail in it because I've talked about it before in Digital Futures. But basically, technology allowed us to completely reuse an old abandoned wooden house by 3D scanning it and by taking advantage of the versatile nature of 6-arm robots. So basically, we scanned the entire structure and we could account for every imperfection in it, so we could actually reuse all of it. And this generated a very interesting workflow because we realized that actually robots and craftsmen, not specialized technicians, but really kind of old school craftsmen, have something in common, which is that none of them work with drawings. We built an entire project without having any construction drawings because robots work based on codes and craftsmen work based on mock-up models and, let's say, on-site explanations. So that was quite interesting to see that they also had to adjust to the way in which they usually work because they usually mount the wooden frame horizontal and then they erect it vertical. But now, because there was already the 3D printed walls, they kind of had to constantly adjust. And it was always this loop between adjusting a little bit the codes for printing and adjusting the way in which craftsmen work, which was very inspiring and actually gave me a lot of ideas. And you can see here a different image where they were trying to mount a different part of the wall. And by the end, where we could even have like completely untrained people be part of the construction site by helping us to remantle the wood tiling. And that was also interesting because in this highly digitalized process where you're working with scanning, with 3D printing, robotic on-site printing, you can actually include people who have no hands-on knowledge of technological tools. And this also allowed us to transform the house from a one-story house to a two-story house with a lot of new spaces, a lot of spaces incorporated within the 3D printed wall. We have this planter wall that you can see here in the back. A lot of new ways of thinking about space, which is a kind of a classical issue. So that was quite interesting to see how something that was completely out of place in the village, a robot, managed to bring new qualities to an abandoned wooden house, traditional wooden house. And speaking of technology and social media and how it influences everyone, I want to introduce you guys to Miss Ju. She is a social media influencer and she lives in a traditional underground village in mainland China in Sanmenxia, quite close to Xi'an, which is one of the only still existing underground living conditions in the entire world. So she has this huge social media platform, which she uses to kind of promote the underground village. She used to have a restaurant organized in one of the underground houses, which was kind of renovated. The interior rooms look something like this. She also had a traditional oven, so she could cook in the traditional way. But what happened is that she didn't really manage to have a lot of clients because not a lot of people are coming to the traditional village. And because of climate change, a lot of the houses are collapsing. The retaining walls that have been surviving for hundreds of years are now kind of in this stage because for the first time, there's flooding in the area, which didn't happen historically. It's kind of an arid climate. So I'm going to skip through these photos. These are just photos from different underground houses that we found in the village. What we decided to do is that we kind of wanted to keep some qualities from the original house, but also bring new ones. So we wanted to create this breathable mesh in order to have a new drainage collection system and to have this kind of planter walls working with the original walls. So again, we use scanning, we use robotic fabrication, we used a mix of highly trained technicians, the robotic technicians, and craftsmen, traditional craftsmen. My part that I was responsible for, this is a project done in collaboration with John Lin and Olivier Ataver. My particular part was working with the courtyard. I had a very specific plan from the beginning because I thought about public space, and that made me think about Italy, the first slide that I started with about the Colosseum, about basically in my opinion, the best example of public spaces. So that's kind of the quality I wanted to bring to the underground house. And we created a series of vaults on the insides. This is the relationship between the inside rooms and the outside courtyard. This was when the project was not yet done. This is the final version of the project. You can see also here the netting on top. The interior spaces, the human and non-human inhabitants, and I want to play a little video. Basically, also something very interesting that happens in the village. You kind of assume it's this forgotten place. At night, there's no light, there's no from the outside, and you think nobody knows about it, but actually, here's where technology is equal. Is that a lot of people know about it, but they don't go to the traditional village. They go to this horrible Disneyland amusement type of park, which is completely fake, but kind of recreates the condition of the underground house. And it's quite funny for us architects that we went there. We found this huge picture from Rudavsky, Architecture Without Architects, the first official documentation of underground houses. And Miss Ju, the person that I introduced you in the beginning, has to fight against this huge conglomerate and has to find ways in which to bring people to the traditional village rather than going to this Disneyland type of amusement park of underground houses. So that's where we came in and not only change the house and its qualities a little bit, but to transform it into a public space. It's called the red and white space, which is weddings and funerals. People exposed to the courtyard with the planters. You can see actually family working. Another very interesting thing is that we had a lot of difficulties with creativity on site, something that you would never imagine, but we actually couldn't print one day and we didn't understand why. And the reason was because it was so hot outside that the material got dried in the extruder, so it just wasn't pushing out. So we had to build like these little umbrella houses to put on top of the robots to protect them from the very strong sun that was going on during the summer. When we mounted the netting, of course, we had again a mix of different types of people working on it. We had students, we had trained workers, we had the villagers. We also brought, because every underground house should have a tree. So we brought this tree from somewhere else because the original tree of this house died. And we had to find creative ways of mounting it in. So I think this project and projects like this that I've done in China have really kind of prepared me for the realities of doing things in Hong Kong. I have to say the projects that I'm going to show from Hong Kong, only one of them is finalized because I discovered it's a lot more difficult to build in Hong Kong. The building code is very strict. The prices are huge. So that's kind of like where these projects in China led me to learn and to start building in Hong Kong. So I'm reaching the Hong Kong era, which I like to call the beach trilogy. The first project, again, I'm not going to get too much into it. I've presented it in another Digital Futures conference, was the Reformative Coral Habitats project, was a collaboration between the Architecture Department and the Marine Biology Department in Hong Kong U. And then I'm going to talk about the Oyster House and the Seaweed Pavilion. So the coral project basically dealt again with climate change. There was the super typhoon, about 80% of Hong Kong's corals got destroyed. So it was kind of our mission to take little fragments of corals and create structures that would allow them to live for long enough until they become like one big unitary structure like corals are originally. We had to use clay printing and robotic fabrication. And amateur divers. So that's why we had to have a very simple geometry so people could just go in and out fast of the water and deploy it. And this is maybe the less attractive slide from the coral project, but I think it's very important to discuss in the age of AI. These are just 8 tests, but I think there were probably 80 tests of how to print the top layers, working with the bottom layers because the bottom layers had to be porous, so there's no sediments deposited on the tile, which would kind of strangle the corals and they wouldn't be able to grow. So this was before AI, and what at the time, about 5-6 years ago, we were calling generative tools, but was actually just kind of old school grasshopper that at the time seemed like a generative tool, but now comparing it to generative AI and all that seems very primitive. And these are the corals when we first deployed, actually the first day of deployment. And these are the coral tiles after some time. I don't remember, I think it's about a year after deployment, where you can see actually something interesting happen is that they attracted another species, not just the coral. And the next project, the Oyster House, is inspired by Lau Fau Shan territories, a fisherman village in Hong Kong where all of Hong Kong's oysters are harvested. But what happens is that only the oyster meats get used and then the oyster shells are just discarded into the village, which kind of creates this huge environmental problem. And going through this research, I also discovered all this traditional typology of the oyster wall in Cantonese-speaking regions of China. So Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Zhongshan, different typologies, the very long wall, the very tall wall, the oyster well, the oyster glass, a very thin way of cutting the oyster shell in order to turn it to a glass-like element. And these were the initial stages of the research. This is a collaboration I did with Hao Zheng and Tianning Li, where we were working with scanning the oysters and then creating very intricate and tailored 3D printed geometries that would act as connection elements in between them. And then when we move to the real sites where we are building within a very strict Hong Kong code, which doesn't allow to build anything from scratch without a building permit and a typhoon permit. But as long as you use an existing structure and you do not increase the structural loads, you should be more or less legit. So we're reusing an old structure in a natural park in Cheung Chau Islands, and we kind of adapted the way of doing the casting after interviewing one of the last traditional oyster craftsmen. This is the existing structure that we 3D scanned and that we're using. This 3D scanning actually allowed us to figure out all the little parts that were part of this structure, and we're designing kind of around that. And we're also working with the Hong Kong flower market, the Prince Edward flower market, where they have plants that if they don't sell, where they're super fresh, they discard them. So we created also this series of non-linear printed 3D tiles, 3D printed clay tiles to work as planters with discarded plants. And then the Seaweed Pavilion is learning from a traditional Danish topology, where they make these roofs by stacking dried algae that they dry with salt. And we actually discovered that there's a similar typology in China, in Shandong province. These pictures, they're not the best, but I literally just took them a couple of hours ago on site because I wanted to show you guys what we're working with. We generated this pavilion doing structural analysis with AI and shape optimization. But in the end, there was, again, a lot of manual work. You can see here the bamboo craftsman just like climbing this crazy structure and doing everything more or less manually. And the last project, it's also in Cheung Chau Islands, is the House for Goats. Our site is this crazy, crazy beautiful boulder that actually proved very difficult to scan and to get the geometry working. We just had a workshop last week with students trying to basically trying to get a good mesh out of the scans from the boulder, but it's full of intricate geometries and vegetation and all that, so it's quite difficult because we want to adapt the fabrication super specifically to the geometry that is on site. And we had a very, very old school idea. We started from basically Picasso collages, moving on to the Dadaist collages, and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy as a reference, and then Mies van der Rohe. So we kind of wanted to have this old school way of thinking about design, of thinking about form, of thinking about basically inspiration, and applied that to our client, which is a series of goats. So it's going to be a house for goats and for humans in combination. And we brought that to the world of AI, working with this old school way of kind of collaging things together and creating a series of basically design iteration ideas from combining physical collages with hand-drawn sketches and AI generation. I think that's all on my part. I hope I didn't go over time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Lydia. That was very refreshing. And even though you've been a recurring speaker at DF, I think there's a lot of value for us in the audience to see the development of your research and career. And what a joy is to have your works basically archived by DF, I guess. Yeah, love the human aspect, especially the hand sketch and the goats. And so surprised to see that in that Disneyland place, they hung the architecture without architect's image. That's surreal. Thank you. Great. So thank you. Neil.
Yeah, I mean,
What do you think?
Thank you. Well, I've got a few ideas. I'm not quite sure whether they're questions or just observations, but maybe they can somehow trigger things off. I mean, what has always struck me about Hong Kong, in a sense, is that it's like a petri dish of new forms of existence, often actually not really documented and not actually really realized. I mean, I think or not turned into an academic article. I think we've seen so much from the walled city to the kind of work that I think that Map Office were doing. They were publishing this because there was this extraordinary practice that was completely, in a way, undocumented and yet fascinating in some way. And, I think I personally, in my research, I just use photographs, but I cited in some way the astonishing spectacle you get in Central on a Sunday when all the Filipino workers come and they kind of lay out they kind of occupy the space in a very intriguing way. And they have lunch there and whatever. And it's incredible. It's this temporary strategic appropriation of a very public space for a kind of private engagement. And then the next day, of course, it's completely different. It's back to being central and being a kind of business, the central business district. So, I mean, Hong Kong has got this is a kind of laboratory in many ways of new things, which just kind of goes ahead. It doesn't. There's no theorization or kind of research that goes into that. I mean, there are also things that crop up in Hong Kong. I'm thinking here of Sophia, the humanoid robot by Handsome Robotics, which I find nauseating in some way, but nonetheless, it comes out of Hong Kong. So we're in a curious space of invention, and it seems like now people are beginning to kind of, I think, begin to use the application of certain things. I was particularly struck by Phil's work, trying to understand the way that actually not just Hong Kong, it's China in general, what he was looking at. It seems like it's a very unique space. And at the same time, it's got a very unique history. Until 1997, it was British. That's why I was there. Then it kind of gradually phasing away. I think there was a dean from America, I forget his name now, of Hong Kong U architecture, and became very international. And now increasingly, of course, it's been becoming more like mainland China. And it's kind of a space of transition, of ultimate hybridity. And I think the hybridity is a kind of hybridity that somehow seems to mix the world of research with the world of practice, in a way. So anyway, I just wanted to just kind of float that out there as a kind of about the uniqueness of Hong Kong as a petri dish of new forms of urban living. And maybe I could just sort of say, when I was there, this is a long time ago, we lived in Fanling. We went up to the border of China, and there was nothing there. There were a few villages, right? And Shenzhen was not there. And now Shenzhen's there. And so the dynamic of Hong Kong is itself kind of, shifting as well. So it's a space of transition, in many ways, of hybridities, and itself, it's continually transitioning, mutating, and changing the whole time. Is that a fair kind of, I don't know, description or analysis of what or does that resonate with you? And maybe I'm particularly interested in those who've come from abroad. So Lidia and Philip, as opposed to, well, and also I don't know if you can call mainland China abroad, but does it maybe Hao? But does that resonate with you as kind of an astonishing space of invention as a kind of petri dish? Maybe I could ask Lidia first, because I think I don't know, I find it very intriguing how you've kind of seized upon, of course, mainland China as well, to intervene with your own hybrid forms of practice. Yeah, let me just throw that out there for any feedback for anyone.
Yeah, I think definitely what is very interesting in Hong Kong is that the perception of it is kind of like this cyberpunk city, all skyrise, all that. But to me, the most interesting part is the way that the city is made. It has from the beginning a very specific relationship that it dictates, in the sense that yes, it's a hyperdense city, but all this density is kind of condensed. So even though the territories are much bigger, the human occupied part is just a third of the city, and almost 2/3 is natural. So you kind of have from the beginning this kind of apartheid system of what's man-made and what's natural. And but then you kind of go through the city and you see all these crazy moments where, I don't know, like there's tree punching for retaining walls and all that. And you always have this tension between what the land wants to do, and there's this crazy typology with mountains everywhere and beach and typhoon and all that. And somehow this very specific architecture that is coming from hyper financial focuses, land is very precious. So then on a very small piece of land, you're going to tend to build so big. So I think, especially in a practice like mine, I'm obviously not working for one of the big offices, so I won't necessarily build a skyscraper. It was very interesting to think about what I can build, all the particularities of this. For example, building on an island, I have to take like 2 different boats to reach the site. So you have to be very specific in the way that you design. I can only carry this much. I can only send things this and that days. So I think in a way, the wildness of the place kind of dictates you have to be very, very organized and very strategic in the way that you plan and you make decisions. You can't really let anything flow, which is very different to a European way of thinking about design and construction and kind of our worlds.
Yeah, so go ahead, yeah, Phil.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting as a provocation. I think you're right. The political context is one in which, you know, the way in which it's multifaceted and the predominance of how it's emerging, and Hong Kong is turning back to front, essentially. And the front is now becoming that border area. Essentially, we're talking, you know, essentially the center of gravity of the Greater Bay Area is moving to the north of Hong Kong. Absolutely fascinating, because as Lidia says, it's the geography and the topography of the city and the port and the harbour has kind of set its context. And now as the sort of modernity and the kind of transformation of roads and network infrastructure that essentially creates this giant circulatory loop across bridges and tunnels around the whole Pearl River Delta, it's going to start to have a fascinating impact, I think, on central and the more traditional areas that we think of as traditional Hong Kong, because they're going to be on the periphery to a certain extent, and there's going to probably be a requirement to shift some of the office towers back to residential, I think. And I think we'll start to see how resilient some of the architecture is. Some of our work, we're actually trying to kind of push and pull and look at how we can reuse existing structures and transition uses, so we can be in a good place to kind of let the city adapt to what is essentially this vast new population centre and hinterland that's going to be part of the territory. So yeah, it's very interesting times to be here.
Yeah, maybe Phil, I could just kind of follow up with you, because I was intrigued by your presentation. I thought it was actually very interesting, and you know, in the context, I would say, of, I mean, you trained as an architect, and not quite, I guess what you do is architecture, and I think it should be perceived in that way. But, you know, in the context of a profession that is, it is struggling already. And, you know, I'm absolutely certain it is going to struggle more with AI for reasons I won't go into now, but it's going to get more and more challenging. And it's almost as though we need to reinvent ourselves as a discipline, you know. And I think one of the things that we kind of have failed to recognize until fairly recently is how the skill set that we have is actually quite marketable. In other words, you know, we are able to visualize things, we're able to understand material behaviors, we can design all these skills, and we can apply those in different ways. And you can think, for example, I did 2 ADs. One was called 3D printed body architecture, where I was looking at people like Neri Oxman, who were 3D printing outfits, fashion items for Iris van Herpen and so on. And I was also looking at, I did a book on space architecture, looking at all the architects that moved into the space industry, not just designing the International Space Station, but all sorts of other things. And it seems like we have our this capacity to do other things, and maybe we need to call upon that at this particular moment to reinvent architecture. And I think what I found so interesting about your work is that, in a way, the problem with architecture as a whole has been the kind of fetishization of form, whereas you dealing with information, you know. And I'm firmly convinced that the city of the future is going to be a city of information, you know, in terms of AI controlled traffic and God knows what else, you know. And the example I always give of in a sense, it's kind of always a bit kind of provocative, but the most futuristic building in a way is this building that Ali Melkawi has got at Harvard GSD, which has been retrofitted with all these, sensors and things, and has a kind of AI brain, as it were, controlling it. I don't know if you know that, although you're a graduate of DST, I don't know whether you know that particular building. And it looks completely traditional because it is traditional. It's just that the way that it works is based on information, and that, I think, is the future. So let me throw that out at you as a thought.
Yeah, no, it's just starting at the end, that final point there, I think it's very valuable. There's a lot of work. I think Francis Duffy did a lot of work on this as well, thinking of the building as a series of layers. Essentially, you have a frame that's pretty immutable. It's going to be there once it's set and so on. And then you layer on cladding systems and envelopes, and then you get into the MEP and so on, and then the interior spaces. A lot of that stuff should and could be rechangeable and reconfigurable. And obviously our work in terms of the urban context takes it and even a step further back in terms of once you set out street grids, widths of streets, the urban grain itself, then it tends to kind of have a very strong indicative effect in terms of how livable and resilient these places are, which is why we try and use these tools to kind of calibrate and make sure where we can, we put in forge new through block routes and so on. As you say, transit and the sort of space of flows, I think sort of Manuel Castell's work that I was, when I was at Harvard, was absolutely kind of enlightening as a sociologist looking at the city and the way in which human bonds and network largely has transitioned into that electronic sphere, and it starts to influence the physical world in very, very significant ways. So it is sort of the networked city is a really fascinating kind of concept in a way. And we do need to think about buildings in terms of their fundamental contribution as sort of vessels, reconfigurable vessels for kind of changing uses. And that's why Hong Kong, that's why I love Hong Kong. It's a sort of laboratory where we're going to kind of go through some of these really quite significant changes. Like I said, the front becoming the back and so on. So yeah, exciting times. And in terms of what it means for the practice, I think this is something that I always face on the day-to-day. One of the key challenges is bringing in that data literacy, getting people, obviously in schools, there are a lot of modules that are now offered in terms of data science and so on, statistics, information modeling. Actually retrofitting that back into practice is not an easy task. And actually, as Adeline's talk clearly says, this vast amount of development work into new LLMs and continuing to develop it. Most of the talent, the coding talent, moves into fields like finance, banking, legal, and so on, where the physicists and the coders have traditionally been drawn. So the challenge for architecture will be to attract that talent. Professor Hao shows some very, really optimistic and powerful kind of first steps as to how we might build a kind of spatially correct, vector-based kind of training models to kind of allow AI to kind of relieve the burden of some of the kind of decoding of the space and so on. So I think for senior professionals, probably they can work and think of using AI as similar to an assistant that needs training and guidance. But for the young emerging professionals, I think they'll need to have a very wider, more computation-based skill set. I think you're right. Move away from building as object and form.
Yeah, just maybe just to pick up on that. I mean, what I was I recall when I was teaching at the AA, a bunch of people who were working with UN Studio were there, and they were saying that really the way that the UN Studio managed to kind of connect with their client was not actually through their drawings, because the clients didn't understand the drawings. It was when they provided diagrams, and I can imagine that the data you're presenting, that's the language the client speaks, and I think that would be the most direct way of engaging. And I guess that's probably also the kind of experience that Adeline has had, in a way, the interface between the architectural world and clients, and how do you create this bridge, or how do you establish a kind of form of communication that is meaningful for the client? I don't know, Adeline, would you want to comment on that and your experience of
Sure thing. Yes, I think to comment on that, it is absolutely true that it was such a realization when I come out to the industry to realize that being an architect or working in the architectural field, I would say perhaps the majority of percentage of communication with the clients is in fact not the drawings that we've been working so hard on, but rather perhaps it's the diagrams. They would like to know numbers, statistics, data. And therefore, data-driven insights is so important, and that is also why AI is definitely making some impact on how we negotiate with clients, what they want as well, and it changes our relationships with them because now they would like that in-house. In fact, they outsource, and then sooner or later they would also like to adopt that in-house. Now, coming back to the theme of hybridities, and earlier on you were discussing the developed built environment in Hong Kong. I think we all understand that Hong Kong is very developed, in fact, sometimes overdeveloped. And I really enjoy seeing how each of us here have a perspective of the future development of Hong Kong's built environment, whether it is like human to human or human to machine or machine to machine, like Provides was clearly categorizing? Or is it a data-driven city? Or do we look at the transformational creativity that can still happen in different parts of the city, like what Lidia is looking at? Or how Phil is obviously tackling the urban planning using the data, and how looking at the overarching general how AI can even optimize structure. And I bring up the fact that Hong Kong is overly developed because personally, as a local, and perhaps Provides feel this too, I've always taken the hybridity as given. I've always taken it as given. In fact, when I go to cities where the demographics or the mix is not as strong as Hong Kong, I would feel like, oh, why is it as such? I really thought that it was the norm to have an international lifestyle. But of course, once I get to know the world a bit more, I realize that's a different case. And of course, that is the strength of Hong Kong. Now, coming back to AI, I think that the future development of our environment will be in the software part, or in the perhaps not the physically built environments. Perhaps it would exist more in, let's say, in the metaverse, or exist more as like the collective memories, or in another sort of way. We would be perceiving the city in perhaps a more digital way, more than before ever. And perhaps that sounds quite general, but I think that probably overarches most of us, our theories. I hope I didn't digress. Perhaps I did.
No. Provides, you want
to? Yeah, I think that was a very nice description of what the situation that we're having. And maybe I would also like to expand that conversation to the future. So like imagine in 20 years time or 30 years time, I'll be retired. And actually at that point, 1/3 of Hong Kong would also be retired, which means that the rest of the people, which are the taxpayer, has to actually afford that 1/3 of retired person. The demographics is going to go down. The city would be more developed than now. And so it will also imply that we will have less projects. So I don't think the current economic downturn would sustain for like more than 5 to 10 years. But I'm thinking that after that, like in 20, 30 years time, we'll actually have even much less project than now. And what would be the role of architect? And, there's also the rise of technology, which, I think Neil had mentioned before that 1 person who knows AI would replace 3 person who doesn't, right? So what role should architect actually take in that future? And I think that as a provocation, I would like to also hear what other people think about this.
Yeah, I think it was 3 people using AI could replace 5 who don't. But that's the thing, a thing that's going to shift as the technology gets more powerful. That ratio is going to increase. Yeah. I mean, maybe provides. I could ask you another question, just a follow-up question before we carry on. You had a post at UCL Bartlett, and we found out, I think yesterday or the day before, that the UCL Bartlett's again been voted by the QS as the top university in a School of Architecture in the world, and I think Hong Kong U was number 13, if I kept correctly. And yet you just chose to come back to China. What was behind that? As a kind of, you have a possibility of being part of that, but yet you wanted to come back home.
Yeah, I mean, I love that question. No one ever actually asked me that, but obviously I felt like the city, like I feel like I should be coming back and contributing. Let me just say, as someone who is born and raised in Hong Kong, I actually never had the awareness that we were colonized, just because of maybe how much we're used to being colonized. And it really wasn't until 2014 when we had like a major social event that I started to actually look into Chinese history and try to really understand, okay, what does all of these actually mean? And so I was actually in Germany at that time. And, you know, Karl Marx came from Germany. Yeah, so I think this actually highlights the context of even when we're doing design projects, right? When we want to design Chinese architecture in Hong Kong, what does that actually mean? Because there weren't many Chinese architecture in Hong Kong. And when we have to look back at our roots, like for instance, looking at some of Fuse or Lydia's built projects, like the Chengdu CBD, I really love that design. And also maybe Lidia building a case study house in a rural space of Hong Kong. What kind of maybe vernacular artwork or vernacular structure can we actually reference to build Hong Kong style Chinese architecture? Right. So I think it also provoked me to come back to think about this hybridity, but also to think about how different generations of people, a generation that has really been colonized and went through a lot of wars, a generation that actually hasn't been colonized but has ideas about colonization. How do you actually bring these people together and start talking to each other instead of fighting? So I think that was one of the key reasons that actually brought me back. Yeah.
So maybe Lydia, just, I mean, Romania doesn't have a huge contacts with Hong Kong. Maybe it does. We have this, but we see Romanians all over the world. I've got Daniel Bolojan down the road here, who's from Romania, and Mariana Popescu has just started a post at MIT. So, but what was the appeal of Hong Kong to someone from Romania? And you know, I know I detect a kind of excitement about the possibilities there that's kind of feeding into all your frenetic activities, and also mainland China as well, of course.
See, this is what I kind of love about Hong Kong. So I moved here being, well, I was very, very young when I moved here. I was 26 years old, and aware, but not that much aware about what Hong Kong means. Obviously, I knew some things. I knew a little bit about the history of it, but I had actually never been even to Asia before coming to Hong Kong. So it was a complete shock when I arrived here. But that was, I think it's a very interesting place, especially if you're kind of early career and you don't have, because I didn't go to, let's say, an Ivy League school or something. So I didn't really have a very, very clear identity. And I think Adeline also picked up on this a little bit. It's such a mix of different things that should or shouldn't be together. And what Provides was also describing that there's layers of history in it, and each person in it kind of has a different relationship to this history, or somehow that it implicated them in a different way. That I think that was very, very freeing in a way. It was this idea that more or less everything is possible, because literally everything is possible within all these layers that exist. That kind of became very inspiring in a sense, and then gave you me a lot of ideas. And most of the things that I actually ended up working with, I discovered more or less by chance. Just going around the city, or someone recommended me to look at this or that. For example, with the oysters, I just went to this research about food waste, and then randomly someone told me about Cantonese oyster architecture, and I went for this huge journey in China, and I actually found some examples in Hong Kong as well. So maybe that's also something that I want to pinpoint in this discussion of AI. I think when the whole digital wave started in architecture, a lot of people got into parametric design and software, and it was very seductive. And then digital fabrication followed. But I think the nicest thing about all these new tools, especially digital fabrication and AI, is that it kind of gives you the same chance to do things that you've been doing, but in a different way. And that makes you be very, very critical. I'm looking even in simple things as AI, trying to get a sketch out of AI, really forces you to think. I don't think they're tools that enable us to think less. I actually think they force us to think a little bit more, because we kind of have to retrain and doing things in a different way.
Sorry, that I actually have a question. And for you guys who actually like start projects in mainland China and in Hong Kong, how do you, I mean, obviously you guys don't speak Chinese, and how do you actually start building relationship with that local community, or like how do you find your ways? Like if you can give a concrete example, like for instance, with your robot projects in the vernacular village, that was very beautiful. Like how do you start building that relationship, and where do you even, you know?
Different ways. So first of all, these are all like team projects. So I always kind of had colleagues that spoke the language. But when I did have to go by myself, because sometimes I was forced to kind of travel by myself, I have an entire workflow between VPN and ChatGPT to translate, and WeChat to send messages, and WeChat has automatic translation. So I depend on like 3-4 different softwares to survive by myself in China.
But maybe how you obviously you spent some time in Philadelphia with the amazing Masood, and of course it's also Rob Stewart Smith's now there, and it's quite a space of research, and you know, so you've been right in the West, and you come, I think it was you studied in Beijing, am I correct? I don't know, but anyway, you studied in China, and now you find yourself in Hong Kong. And what are the things that surprise you about Hong Kong? I mean, in some ways, I think what always struck the West about Hong Kong was the incredible intensity of the urbanism and the size of the buildings, but then Shenzhen completely outstripped that. So Hong Kong might seem like a quaint little village for you, but what has been your impression of working in Hong Kong and the kind of international mix of people there? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I think Hong Kong is a kind of a city which merges the culture from both West and East. So in the daily life, you can live like people from China, but in the academics, you can still follow the rules like the Western countries. So I think here is a very good place that we can care both of my daily life, my family, and also my research. So that's my personal thinking of Hong Kong. But let's back to research. So actually, technically speaking, I think Hong Kong it's very good for carrying out research because the data is in a very good quality. So it's not about the data itself, but it's about the way they treat the data. So it's more like a system that you can so everything you do for the in the city. So every behavior of the citizens in the city, and also every object, like the morphology of the buildings, also every like traffic. So all those things, they can be recorded as digital data. So that provides a very good chance for the AI to step in, to learn from those data and to decode what is the rules and what is the patterns and features hidden behind this data. So once we have this trained AI, actually this AI can be trained day by day. So which means that we can have the most updated data provided, actually generated by the citizens. Like in every day. using this kind of data to train the most recent AI. Then this AI can be a like decision model, which helps us to further decide what should be so what our city should look like. So I think this is a very good chance of merging Urbanator and AI together. Yeah. But still we are comparing like mainland China and the US. Hong Kong is like the somewhere between the two countries. So I think maybe in the future it will still serve as a kind of like connection between the Western and Eastern countries. Yeah.
Maybe just I want you to have a conversation with yourself, but just one comment, a final comment from me is, what is interesting to me is the kind of relationship between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. In that there's a combined biennale, and there are, I know that Wan Yu Ho's based in Shenzhen. There's some guys working in Hong Kong, and she herself, of course, was a professor, or has been a professor, maybe still is, in Hong Kong U. Well, how would you characterize that dynamic between Hong Kong and Shenzhen?
Well, I think yeah. So it's related to a recent topic that a lot of like Hong Kong residents can come to Shenzhen to for their daily life. So we are also researching on this kind of human behavior. I think from my understanding, they are quite different, actually quite different. Shenzhen is a kind of, so you can say Shenzhen is a people who become rich very quickly. Now Hong Kong is a people who is always rich. Then you can see gradually richer people from like Shenzhen is coming forward to Hong Kong. Then Hong Kong has to think why, and then maybe maybe the future is that we have to think the cooperation between Shenzhen and Hong Kong. So I personally like came to Shenzhen many times, like maybe one or two times each month. Yeah, there are many like research institute and research activities and many like lectures like speeches in Shenzhen, but not in Hong Kong because the people from mainland China has some difficulties in Hong Kong. So they try to like have some activities in Shenzhen so that the people from Hong Kong can come to Shenzhen, and then the people from all mainland China can also come to Shenzhen. So, but that is not a like technical problem, is a political problem. But I think maybe maybe in the future, so the entire China will become the entire China. So which means that the Hong Kong and Shenzhen might become a kind of merged city. Then we should think them both together.
Adeline, you're part of the Hong Kong Shenzhen Biennale you mentioned, yeah?
Yeah. Oh, after quite a long time of waiting for the final confirmation, as provides may know. Yes, now it is confirmed, and this year's theme is AI, of course, and Wan Yu is one of the curators, and we have a team of very nice people doing this, so very excited about it. And we are, in fact, discussing similar topics like how do we look at the relationship between Hong Kong and Shenzhen and relate to the technological development of the two, and also reflect on how we've kind of helped each other on the way. You know what I mean? Like Shenzhen and Hong Kong's technological developments, and how maybe Hong Kong's data is better treated, perhaps like what Hao had mentioned. But in Shenzhen, it is also another petri dish, and it is a newer petri dish, so that less things have grown in there in comparison to Hong Kong. So there are certain opportunities in Shenzhen for technological development and breakthroughs, not just the research, but also the implementation and application of technologies into practices. So in general, the two cities together, bi-city, is strong, I think. That relationship is strong and valuable. Yeah. I should definitely catch up with you again on the developments of the Biennale for everyone in this meeting. I mean, you'll hear from me.
Yeah. I mean, but maybe just kind of throw something in a spanner in the works in some senses. I'm giving a paper in a conference on space architecture in a week or so's time, and the title of my piece is going to be "Is AI the new space race?" Because it's kind of interesting the kind of competition that's happening. They always compared some of the AI developments, such as the AlphaGo game, which of course in Asia was a huge kind of wake-up call. It became the Sputnik moment after when the US was shocked by the Soviet advances in sending a satellite into space when they hadn't done so. And of course, we've got the DeepSeek moment recently, which has also been described as a kind of a Sputnik moment. So things are kind of I think they're hotting up in that war. That's all I can say. But that's going to be intriguing for the future. I think we should try and wrap up. I don't know if we've got any final comments from everyone, but it's been, for me, I got to say, one thing I love about Hong Kong, and I always try and go through Hong Kong whenever I have a chance to, because having been brought up, my first memories of Hong Kong, when I smell Hong Kong, when I see Hong Kong, when I hear Hong Kong, it seems to me like home. So I always want to go there. But what are the real benefits of going there? It's like like electricity, like a shot of electricity. It's such a vibrant, vital, dynamic place to be. And I think today we got this incredible sense of vitality and these different initiatives all working in different ways, but coming together. Actually, it's been a very beautiful panel in terms of these different perspectives on things. But maybe, I don't know if any of you got any final sort of comments to kind of before we wrap up things up, but
just from my side, yeah, I totally agree that the sort of Hong Kong's becoming part of the facet, the Greater Bay Area, and this sort of giant conurbation. But as Professor Hao said, at least for the next 20 years or so, Hong Kong has that freedom of movement, mobility that will be absolutely vital. It's still going to be a gateway to China. It's still going to be very open, perfect to the rest in terms of information flows. So in that respect, it kind of retains that relevance, even though it's got significant challenges to overcome. So I think the combined entity, when we get there 2050-ish, we'll have this sort of new internodal metropolises and so on. I think it was the Bruce Malbrook, the SMLXL, you're going to have this sort of conurbation of 280 million people or something. And so it's going to retain the relevance as a kind of testing lab for both those modern, thrusting, very recent city developments that you see in Shenzhen, and then they're more archaic that need to adapt. So I think it will retain relevance in terms of its multifaceted nature. I can't wait to see it, and a lot to digest. I'm sure we'll all be wearing sort of AR overlay glasses to kind of try and allow us to kind of stay up to date with the information flows and what the AIs are telling us about the city. So yeah, now we're just building the infrastructure. It's like building the roads and the infrastructure for what's to come from an urban experience and perspective, I think.
Yeah, maybe also just to jump in on that 2050. Yeah, definitely one aspect would be the Hong Kong, Shenzhen. And I think another thing is to be able to understand what machines are really good at doing, and whatever they're not good at doing, we should hurriedly equip ourselves with those skills. And personally, I would think that machines are good at objective and inductive calculations right now. And so personally, I would focus more on the communication side and dealing with humans. And I think one of the difference between Hong Kong and Shenzhen is that Hong Kong actually has a very well networked of NGOs that I also work with, and they're very integrated within the public housing development in the past 50 years. And so how we actually leverage that as a soft infrastructure and working with architects and the authorities to actually activate a retrofitting in the next 50 years. I think that would be one of the key direction. And a second insight I can give is that if my project is conducted anywhere in this world, it will probably take 3 times the price. But because we have our back with mainland China, most of my stuff are literally Taobao, like all of my materials and even like stuff. Yeah. And so I would definitely think that by leveraging this, how to say, like a trade, I don't know the English word for it. Yeah, the trading advantage, that we should also try and think about how we can experiment with maybe more ecological ways of fabrication instead of just a cheap way of extracting from mainland resources. And Hong Kong should take the lead together with Shenzhen in actually experimenting with that. I don't know, like coffee powder architecture, or oyster architecture, and stuff like that.
Lidia?
Well, oh yes, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about so many good ideas today. I think maybe one thing to take from this panel is was really I was kind of curious to see everyone, and I think it's a kind of you mentioned in the beginning, but I think it's really nice to see how one place can influence, because everybody has a very specific connection to the city, but it influenced like such different bodies of works that even though we were kind of all under this umbrella theme, everything was very different. And I think that's very telling of the city itself. And I hope actually for like, let's say the young generations that watch us, students and all that, there's different ways of relating to a city, of relating to a place, of relating to technology. And I think everybody can kind of find their own space within that. You don't have to push back whoever you are, or whatever you think or feel or things like that, in order to be integrated in this kind of contemporary vocabulary of design, to say so.
Adeline, you want to say one final comment? Or I can.
Sure. What about Hao? Do you want to
Hao, sorry, yes,
say one line?
Oh, do you want to go? It's very late for you guys then. I should remember it's because, yeah. Hao.
Yeah, so yeah, so may I have a question again?
No, we just got any
I'm
final
quite
comments
lost.
about the session, any thoughts or
Oh, I see.
experience? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a little late actually.
Yeah,
So
it is.
it's usually
I mean, the
worries.
final comment can
No.
also be a question. I think it's fine. Like a question as a final comment.
Yeah, well, if for my final comment, I think here. So today here we have a panel that we all are working in Hong Kong, or maybe are living in Hong Kong, but I think our research fields are quite different. So that's the amazing thing of Hong Kong, that we can have a lot of different persons working together and also living together. So so I think maybe in the future, since we are in different university, from CTU, from Hong Kong U, from like CUHK, so maybe we could have some cooperations after this panel about how to like further embed digital technologies in our teaching. Of course, especially for the teaching of our like architecture program. So as you know, I'm actually the associate professor or associate program leader of the Bachelor of Architecture and also Master of Architecture program here. So I think we really should take the responsibility to like educate our next generation of architects, because currently the architects in the like in 5 years or in 10 years are totally different than the architects like 10 years ago or 5 years ago. They are the new generation of AI architecture. So I think we should we should think in the future that maybe architects can work with AI. Then we should start from educating our next generation architects. Yeah, thank you.
That's fantastic. Just thank you. And one line for myself is that thank you so much, everyone. Like sincerely, thank you so much for giving time and accepting the invitation. And I personally am very proud of today's panel because I think today's discussion was really, really good. We really bring together the diversity that I think it has some energy in it. I think each of us are looking into a different aspect and attacking kind of the current situation with a different angle. And I appreciate that so much. One thing we didn't talk about is Hong Kong's food. It's fantastic. And the fusion foods are great. But I will just end with Cantonese. Want to say thank you in Cantonese. 多謝大家，多謝支持，我哋下次繼續。Neil, back to you.
That's okay. I mean, Adeline, I think I was just thinking actually because we talk about fusion food. I think to me, Hong Kong is fusion. It's absolutely that. And I rather than seeing the differences, I mean, there were very fresh, different perspectives. I see the commonality where, I saw a group of people all passionate about architecture and its different manifestations, all passionate about the use of technology, and all passionate about the future in some ways. And all I would say is that I think in the age of AI, what we really have to design is not another building, but the future of the profession itself. And I saw so many kind of intriguing, novel approaches. I made lots of notes about what Lydia was talking about. I thought Phil's work was fascinating. And, all of this was coming together as this kind of, it was Hong Kong. It was a perfect manifestation of Hong Kong. So I want to thank you for showing us that. And I'm looking forward to my trip. I'm going to be there on the 1st of May, and hopefully I'll catch up with some of you when I'm there. I also want to thank the team behind this, Javala Piakas, who's with us now and did the posters and things, and all the Digital Futures team. It's great to have this, and we only could do this because the clocks went forward last week in the States, so it's not so late for you, but it still is late for you. So I want to thank you for staying up so late and sharing us these amazing stories. And I get very, very passionate, very excited by Hong Kong itself, and I hear these further stories from Hong Kong. I'm very excited once more. So thank you for injecting such imagination and vitality into this session, even though it's so late. Thank you, everybody. It was amazing. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.